All right. Sup, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and I'm here with Adam Heytani, Niklas Norin, and Victor Magnuson for the first in what I hope is a series of developer roundtables with different developers, different game designers, different people within the industry who want to come on and sort of just sit back and gab about games. I ended up getting some questions from patrons, which we will answer at the various at the end, but I'll probably prune some of those. So if you put a question down and you don't see it answered, it's most likely because you're dumb. I'm just joking. Nobody's dumb. It's because we just probably didn't want to answer that at the time, or maybe it was something that just didn't really fit with our group. Going from left to right, first starting with Niklas, can you go ahead and just give us sort of a brief summary of how you got to where you are and some of the games you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Niklas Norin. I've worked at Avalanche Studios for it's 10 years now, and before that, I actually went to school together with Victor, although one year difference. But yeah, that's how we got to know each other. So I started working at the Avalanche Studios in 2007, working on Just Cause 2. After that, I worked on Mad Max, and then I moved here to New York and worked on Just Cause 3 since then.
Oh, gotcha. And your current title at this time?
Is lead AI and combat designer. So basically what I do is that it's kind of like within my responsibility, everything that is AI and combat related. So it's everything from like animals to enemies and everything in between there, in terms of the like world simulation, all that, and then also weapons or attacks or player mechanics that involves combat.
Excellent. And Adam, what about you?
So I got my start working in MMO projects. I worked on Vanguard, which cratered the first EverQuest, and then I worked on Rift. I ran the dungeons and the raids in the Rift game, and then a more casual, smaller MMO called Trove before I came out here to Germany, where I am the head of game design at Deck13. So Deck13 published Lords of the Fallen some years ago, near the beginning or near the launch of PS4, and then we just released the Surge earlier this year, and we have a DLC coming out for that pretty soon. So I run the design team. We have 12 designers right now, spread across the disciplines. So some narrative, some systems, several level designers, and of course people working on encounters, combat, and enemies and stuff. And I spent a lot of my time in meetings, more than I wish sometimes. But it's also really important. I see my job as one to remove all the impediments from everybody else. And I still kind of miss being able to build encounters on my own. I still hope to carve out the time to take a boss or two off of my boss guy. But for now, it's mostly in a advisory and critical sort of role and negotiating with the other department heads so other people don't have to.
Very cool. What about you, Victor?
Well, like Niklas, I went to school with Niklas.
I want to hear some school stories too.
Yeah, sure.
Were you guys crazy in school? Come on, admit it.
No, not too bad.
Not too bad. Cool. You're like, we were only arrested like a half a dozen times, but that's.
It was on a small island outside of Sweden called Gotland.
What? So who goes to school on an island? That's awesome. That's an awesome story by itself. Anyway, continue.
And then I started working at Fatshark after I graduated and been there for 9 years almost. And I've worked on all of the games that we've done, basically, like Letting Go. Then we did, what is it? Oh, we've done so many.
The Professor...
Escape from Dead Island.
No, it's Escape Dead Island, yeah, sadly.
Victor, what happened?
My first design job. I was a QA to begin with, so I started up. We didn't have a QA team, so I started up the QA team. And then my first design gig was actually as a consultant for Battlefield Play for Free for EC back in the days. And then I came back to Fatshark, and then we did Crater, which was my first sort of design job. Mm-hmm. And then we did. I did some work on Escape Dead Island, and then I did. Vermintide, I think, came after that. But we also did like Bionic Commander Rearm 2. We did War of the Vikings, War of the Roses. I think we've done 8 or something games since I started, so it's
very cool.
Becoming a blur.
and also, and I have to say this every time because people might be new. Him and Neil were my first two, or Liam were my first two introductions to the gaming society as developers, and couldn't have been nicer. It was a blast. I was like, oh, this is gonna suck. Like somebody's gonna be mad. They're gonna show us the game the 50th time. They're gonna be tired. And instead, it was hilarious, man. That was
it's the best demo I've ever done. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I still can't quite figure out if Liam, if he's just the best player in the world or if we were that bad. But that was hilarious because every 5 seconds I was like, I'm dead, and all of a sudden the elf would come in and he'd be like, da 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 da, and he'd save us. And the one guy's never played a PC game, and so he's looking at a keyboard, and he's like, and these guys never said a word. They weren't like, okay, seriously, you guys just need to go. Instead, they were all, no, here's how you do it. And I could sort of sense that I was going to like that game from day one, and man, did I. Like that turned out great. And speaking of those games you're working on now, let's describe just a little bit about a day in the life of. So normally I go around and then back around so that way one person isn't always last, one person isn't always first. So this is going to be on Victor to go first. What's a day in the life of you right now?
Well, we're working on Vermintide 2, and we just revealed it last week. So it's been a lot of work with PR lately, but we are sort of finishing it up. We are soon in alpha in like 2 weeks. We're going to release it sometime in the beginning of next year. So what I do is I'm the designer in charge of I'm in charge of the world team. So I work a lot with the level designers and make sure that they make levels that work well with our gameplay, sort of. And I've sort of turned into a semi-producer. So I do a lot like Adam said. I make sure that the impediments go away. So I run around a lot, and I'm in a lot of meetings and talking to people and making sure that everything sort of works and that everything is sort of, if somebody has a problem, I like try to fix it for them. And also I help out with design of like events and bosses and stuff and like that.
Excellent. What about you, Adam?
That's pretty cool. It's actually not so different for me. So we're finishing up the DLC for the Surge called The Walk in the Park. It's in like a collapsed amusement park, part of this big, corporate structure complex from the base game. And it's kind of like the same sort of project state, So it's almost done. We're in this polishing phase. People are working hard with the time we have left to try to iron everything out. And really, we're going like encounter by encounter and level pacing and play testing all the time and seeing what little bits and pieces we can get in there. That'll come out this year. And so it's kind of this scramble to finish. And then also in the, like doing planning stuff for the future all at the same time.
Very cool. What about you, Niklas?
So I can't really say where we are since we haven't announced, but anything. But in general, it is very similar to what both of these guys are saying, which is that in my role, it's also a lot of kind of like overseeing, like leading our team, the AI team and the combat team, and making sure that we stay with the visions of the directors and we reach our goals, and also doing a lot of designs, making sure that they work properly with the game that we're doing, and yeah, a lot of meetings, a lot of basically, as these guys said, like it's a lot of work with just making sure that like everybody has what they need, and that we're not straying away in some weird direction, and it's not going to work with like we deliver something to the level designers and they're like, oh, we don't know what to do with this and so on. So there's a lot of like communicating and just talking and making sure that we're all in sync.
Very cool.
Yeah. This is always what happens in our careers. Like even if we start as designers, or you start as like CS or QA and then junior designer, associate designer, by the time you get up to this sort of senior level, you're spending tons and tons of your time just like negotiating agreements, and getting statuses, and it becomes more and more production-y and less making stuff-y, and it can be a tough transition sometimes. It's like when you're used to having total control over what you're building, and then you're kind of ceding that control in order to have more influence in the project. That's always a trade-off. But I think hopefully for all three of us, this is a rewarding sort of transition over time.
Yeah, right.
No, it is definitely like some days where I really miss, like, I wish I could just sit down, as you were saying, like I wish I could sit down and just implement things and build things and so on. But yeah, as you're saying, it's also that, like, that's a trade-off, because also I have much more influence. So on.
That's very cool. It reminds me of the Daikatana story. I don't know if you guys ever heard about the arrow with 1 million polygons. You guys ever hear about that? So,
no.
John Romero, who definitely a king of video games, whether you like him or not. He certainly ushered it in with other people with him, obviously. But he went on to make Daikatana, and they were talking about what happens when you don't communicate correctly. And one of the things that happened is the artists started making assets that were for the in-game. And remember, this is back in the day. And they were making like 1 million or 100,000 polygon arrows. And they were like, it's 1 frame a second. What the fuck is going on with this game? And then they went and found, like, some of the artists their information had just been skewed, and they didn't necessarily know what was going on at that time. And they ended up having a huge snafu, which I'm sure took a lot of time from people. Speaking of time, one of the things that comes up all the time is what engine and how people decide on what engine. Like, what are the reasons? Is it because it's easier to use? Do you go in-house and create your own? So starting with Niklas, if you haven't been a part of this discussion, that's also fine. Maybe if there's a certain engine you really like. But have you ever been involved in those discussions, and sort of what happens? How does everybody sit down and go, okay, it's Unreal, or it's Unity, or it's what we make, which I know you guys have your own, but I mean, how does that come up?
So for us, like, we have our own proprietary engine that has its strengths and its weaknesses, and basically, I mean, we are making a lot of games like around the strengths and weaknesses of our engine, and it's never really been a discussion about using any other engine, because we definitely believe that our engine is really, really good at what is doing good, and those are also the types of games that we want to make. So yeah, I haven't really been involved in any of those discussions.
Well, when you are talking about your inside, and you're looking at your games and you're deciding, okay, a Mad Max, right, or a Just Cause, or what have you, has there ever been a time where you've looked at your own engine and been like, you know what, I wish we could do this, but it's difficult? Or the other way around, where you're like, maybe your engine allowed you.
Never.
Yeah, never. Let's move on. It's obviously never occurred. Or have you ever looked at your engine and said, you know what, we can do this thing that we haven't done before, or that we didn't do in this way. Let's do it because our engine allows that. Has there ever been, even if it's AI, has there been something where you're like, this works really well?
We're constantly developing our engine. Like, each project adds new things to the engine, and we're definitely, like, between different projects we are and that's a lot of communication between the different teams to see, like, hey, is this something that actually you guys, should we put this like as a kind of like permanent addition to the engine, or is it more project specific things that we're doing, and so on. So it's constantly developing it, and inside the projects as well as, and then we have, when we're doing maybe some bigger things, for example, we switched over to volumetric terrain, and which is like a huge feature. So that was kind of done offline, somewhat outside of the or not directly involved in the project.
Understood. What about you, Adam, when it comes to that kind of stuff?
So I'm in a similar boat. We have also a proprietary engine called Fledge. And I mean, of course, there's all sorts of strengths to building your own technology, owning your own technology. If you want to build in features or focus on certain types of assets or content that you really want to make, awesome for your game, then you have the power to do that. You don't have to be communicating with, an engineer working on Unreal or something to try to get some feature implemented. But like Niklas was just saying, over time, you add pieces. Sometimes you remove pieces, not as much as you add pieces, though. And so the difference between, one of these really big, what I think of as like a big commercial engine like Unreal or Unity or something, is you have a whole lot of special casey stuff in our own internal engines that end up like over the years becoming kind of crufty, so if a new person comes in and they want to do something that they've done in Unreal, maybe it's not done exactly the same way. There's a learning curve, and then certain things get really complicated, and you really just need somebody to like teach it to you. So there's a difference in the level of documentation. There's a difference in the level of articulation of certain features that you want to achieve, but you're trading that away in order to create like a tool that is specifically suited to the types of projects that you want to make. So there's a lot of other engines out there that kind of fall into this category. I know that like Frostbite started out as a very streamlined, high-powered sort of thing, but you couldn't do hardly anything flexible that you'd imagine from something like Unreal, in it. But it's an F1 race car, right? It's not made for driving around the streets. It's made to go fast. And so you have these kind of purpose-built pieces of software that are sort of their own product. You have feature lists and you have bug fixing in the context of your engine, even outside of the actual product that you're using it for.
I love his wording, crufty. What in the hell does crufty mean? You said, or did you mean crusty?
No, crufty is what I meant.
Okay,
crufty
so let's give
like,
people a description of crufty.
You're looking at like a projectile module or something, right? And your projectile module has 45 fields in it, and they range from like behavior toggles to like angular settings and lead distances, and whether it's taking gravity and physics into account, all this stuff. But if you haven't looked at this before, it looks like an airplane cockpit.
Gotcha.
It's like just shit everywhere, and it's not as intuitive. But it's probably not intuitive to drive a F1 race. Well, I know maybe it is. Maybe it's just a wheel and a gas pedal. But to me, it seems hard. And imagine that spread across all the various types of mechanics that you could build into an action combat based game, and you can get really, really, really deep, and you have a million knobs to do what you want. But that also has a cost in terms of how intuitive it is to pick up and how easy it is to build particular elements. So that's what crufty is. I
see. So everybody watching this video, expect to hear crufty in a review of mine very soon. I'm going to drop crufty. I swear to God, that is a perfect. It just sounds obtuse, let alone that's sort of what it means. Victor, what about you when it comes to? I know you guys are using your own particular one, but like what were some of the discussions around that?
It's the same thing as the other guys. I mean, since we didn't build it ourselves, but we had a subsidiary company that built our engine. That was called BitSquid, and now it's called Stingray. And now it's and then we sold it to Autodesk. So we're using that engine still because we sort of built it, so we know it from like back and forth and everything. And we have a small, but now Autodesk is I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I think they're sort of stopping. I don't know if they're still doing something with the engine or not, but we have our own version of the engine that we've continued to develop, and we have our own engine team that are sort of building it. So our version of Stingray is not the same version of Stingray that you could get from Autodesk, really. And like now it's more of our own, and we've used it forever. And before we used that, we used the same guys that built BitSquid. They built the diesel engine that Grin used. So we used that before, and then when Grin went under, we had the diesel engine, and we used that for like Bionic Commander Rearm 2 and Len and Gold. And then when they started BitSquid, we started using the BitSquid, and so there's pretty similar, but at least like in a user interface sort of way. If you've used one, you can use the other. But so for us, there's never really been a discussion about using any other engine since we had our own, basically. I don't know what's going to happen in the future since like there's no true development team for Stingray anymore. So either we like build up our own engine team and take it over and build our own version of it, or I don't know actually. We haven't really had that discussion yet, but I think it's going to come. But my guess is that we're going to keep working with Stingray or our version of Stingray and just keep building on it.
It's interesting because a lot of people I talk to are using, Unreal or whatever, and it's weird that all three of you. I had forgotten that all three of you guys are using your own custom engines, and it's always.
It depends. It super depends on the types of projects that you're working on, So we're working on like bigger projects, and maybe longer timelines, and we're doing like console releases and stuff. But if you're like an indie team, you're probably not. I mean, like
not a good idea.
It would be terrible.
Right.
It'd be so terrible.
Unity and buy
stuff. Exactly. Yeah. And so, I hope that if, younger developers or people on indie teams watching this, I hope they don't take the idea that, you know what I need to do? I need to hire a rendering engineer to build my rendering loop from nothing. It's like, this is a bad plan unless you have, the scale where you're actually going to benefit from that. Otherwise, it's way, way, way better to use one of the, commercially available and supported engines to do what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that it's a big investment to make your own engine, and I mean this or a version of the Apex engine, our engine existed when I came to Avalanche, and we've been constantly developing that for 10 years. But making that from scratch, then I think that unfortunately that wasn't available like when we went to school, me and Victor, that like at that time Unreal wasn't available and so on. So I think it's like such a great thing now for indie developer that these engines are available, and you may not be able to realize your like dream epic big game, but it may make it possible for you to make a few games to eventually maybe reach that point where you can make that investment.
It might not be the smartest idea to start with your big epic game anyway.
No.
So I'm gonna build like an MMO. It's gonna be like.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm gonna buy Unity and I'm gonna make GTA 7. It's gonna be skipping 6.
Yeah.
It's all me.
But it's gonna be better than GTA.
It's
so.
Way better. I mean, of course. It is interesting though to hear so much discussion around engines now. Especially, we get a lot of complaints like Steam, where people are like, "Oh, they're asset flipping." Because you're just buying you're buying some Unity assets, you're throwing them in, you're making a game. And I'm sort of against them selling them, but in a weird way, I love that there's somewhere someone can download, because sometimes a person is just trying to say, here's my idea, but I'm using the assets from the Unity store with their zombie or whatever. And it right now it's a gray area, because you get people talking about like, these assets can just be purchased, where, let's be honest, back in the day, as you guys said, there was nothing. It was like hard work was your asset. It was there wasn't a place to go, and Unreal becoming so cheap. Because I think Unreal, am I wrong? Wasn't Unreal prohibitively expensive in the past for a license?
Oh yeah.
Back in the
a couple years ago before they did it. So a question that comes up a lot of times, speaking on engines and your games. And let's see which we started with Niklas last time, so we'll start with Victor. I think that's how we went. What are some of the limitations that still? Now we all know there's limitations because we want to create the best game ever. But I'm saying, when you're trying to create a doable game, what are some of the limitations we still run into, whether it be CPU, GPU, or something? A lot of people are asking, is it something not connected? PhysX was tried, where it was like, hey, we're going to have physics cards because that can offset this, and then that sort of died out. Is there anything you feel that, like, man, there's one thing that we run into a lot, and I would like to see that fixed, whether it be console or PC?
I think it completely depends on the game, but we are constantly running into CPU problems, which is probably not that common. But for us, it's a big deal because, one, we have a lot of enemies at a time, and we have a lot of like navigation and stuff going on. And also how the engine is built that's just how it functions. So that is pretty uncommon, I think. A lot of the time, I think it's the GPU that sort of is the biggest problem. But for us, it's actually not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is definitely our CPU. So that would be awesome to get more computing power. But the problem with all that is, as soon as you get more power, you just do more stuff. So it never matters really. I think it's like the second you get like, oh, we have 10% more. Okay, let's put in 10% more of something. So it's like, but we're always gonna be pushing the limit. I think I think it's never gonna stop really. I really look forward to the time when we sort of stop like really trying to achieve the sort of picture perfect graphics and stuff like that. Or when we've done that, so we're sort of over that. Everything can look like it's for real, and we start sort of innovating in other areas. I think that's gonna be cool. But I don't think it matters. It's like, give me more power, I will give you more stuff. It's like,
I can spawn 30 Skaven, but now I can spawn 33.
Yeah, I mean, we would just spawn a hell of a lot more Skaven if we could.
What about you, Adam?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. I mean, it's kind of the ideal gas law in the form of game features and content and stuff, right? Like whatever you can do expands to the very limit of what you're, technologically capable of doing. And it's a really difficult thing to limit your scope to some ceiling below the real ceiling. I mean, that takes discipline, and I've never met anybody who was able to do it for a whole project. It's like you kind of intend to do that, and you creep this, you creep that. Oh, we'll optimize this later. So. I mean, we end up CPU bound as well. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but my theory is that CPUs are way more static generally. Like GPU, like the things that are running on the GPU are generally things you can throttle up, throttle down. If you're running multiple GPUs, then you have a giant monitor in 4K or something. Then of course it's going to take more power, but you're able to flex that in some way. But your CPU has a more set maximum than your GPU.
Mean, it's hard to put like an option on like navigation or AI. You can dumb down the AI in the game, so it's not going to take like that's
right. That makes sense. Adam, when you guys are working on stuff and you're seeing the CPU GPU problems, or let's say somebody comes to you and you were talking about feature creep and all that kind of stuff. How do what would you say? When do you notice it? Do you notice it like AI, like Victor was saying? Is that when it seems to pop up the most? Because it seems like AI is CPU, right? I mean,
usually. I mean, I think always. Actually, I can't think of AI running on a GPU ever.
Right.
But
only neural networks, but that's a whole other.
Oh yeah, hey, there you go.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, this the biggest hitches that we see generally is like when we spike the GPU is when we trigger a whole bunch of shit all at the same time. So a lot of times, in a level-based game in particular, you can't have all the assets active all at the same time. So you have to set up groupings and calls and ways to kind of turn them off and save their state, turn them on, restore the state, or simulate movements when they're not actually active and initialize them in a new state. And sometimes, like especially early when we're like prototyping through an area and then real assets start coming in, we find that there's little pockets where we're just triggering too much shit all at the same time, and you get like a really ugly hitch just in like this one spot, and you just have to kind of like massage this out as an implementation fix. There isn't really a technical fix. That's just like we're doing it in a suboptimal sort of way. And so when we run into that, we then have to kind of like take these little spots, spread them out, try to optimize it from like a design standpoint as opposed to from a technical standpoint. But there's always this tension. It's a healthy tension, I think, but there's a tension between what the designers are trying to do, what the artists are trying to do, and what the technical team thinks is reasonably supportable with the technology. So you're all kind of pushing yourselves and trying to achieve the most, but we're always going to try to do a bit more and then try to fiddle away to make it work, even if it's like a little bit above spec. So this is just, I think, the nature of game development is that we're not usually satisfied to just say, oh, okay, that's the boundary, whatever you say. Usually we're going to push that somehow, or at least try. It's kind of a mix between doing technical optimizations, and then trying to implement in the most, extensible way that you can.
And Niklas, you're obviously AI, so you're running into this problem probably every single day. Is there any, when you are running into these kind of issues, do you ever sit back and just go, man, I really wish I had a better CPU, or do you jump into some books and shit and try to figure out a way to do it? I mean, obviously you're going to try to do it smarter, but is it something that some of this stuff can be fixed with, I wouldn't call them shortcuts, because gamers will be like, you cheated us. That just happened recently. But I mean, like tricks or things that make it appear like something is happening, sort of what Adam hinted to. Do you guys ever try to do those things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely like of the kind of attitude that I try to, like, if possible, design around these problems rather than like necessarily trying to brute force them by like, or so on. But yeah, we're generally, I mean, maybe it's for me working in basically games for 10 years now with a lot of emergent gameplay and a lot like open world. So we always have to take into account the worst case scenario. So that is kind of like a stress test of like, well, what if the player actually brings like 10 cars into the middle of the town, and then crashes a big cargo plane into that, and at the same time there's a bunch of cows and people around and all these things. Like, so those are the scenarios that, like, so in a way we're not like running into those thing like on a daily basis, but those are the kind of like stress tests that we have to make. And but yeah, in terms of like limitations in general, so one thing that we actually did do on JC3, a trick of some sort, is that like we definitely had a performance problem with our AI. They're running behavior trees, and we were basically running too many behavior trees all the time. So we had to time slice them. So so we started out with them running only every second frame, and we actually ended up running every fourth frame, which is not optimal. And there's definitely like a lot of trade-offs we had to do, and there's definitely a lot of like small side effects, but we deemed them like small enough for us to be able to do it. But then, yeah, so in terms of like limitations, technical limitations and game engines and all of that, I definitely feel like, I think that tools and like good middleware is probably more blocking more, because we're getting to a point that like, yeah, we can build things, and it could be like, it just requires like, we need an army of environment artists. We need so many people now. And I think that is becoming a bigger blocker in terms of, especially if you're not a huge Ubisoft team of like 300-400 people. If you're a smaller studio and so on, that I think is like getting really small, and it's like, yeah, that's constantly happening. But getting much better tools and middleware to basically allow us to produce things faster is probably the bigger blocker that I see in terms of like making the game, like if you start like realizing like some like big dream game or something like that, or like a big vision for the game. Because basically resources is probably the thing like resource limitations in terms of people is probably something we run into more than limitations of the technology.
Gotcha. So when you mentioned earlier that you guys are doing like volumetric terrain, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So that sounds like a direct step to solve that kind of problem. So like who knows what the trade-off is, but like how many volume or how many environment artists, for instance, is that feature worth? It's probably worth a fair number, for your project. And so that's something I really believe in too. And it's really hard to come up with a good procedural solution set to something as typically handcrafted as this kind of thing, but it's like insanely beneficial when you can. And we handcraft all our stuff, and it's not a multiplicative solution, right? It's an additive solution. It's just man hours equals assets, and if you don't have enough man hours, you don't have enough assets. And so we outsource with a couple asset creating studios in China, and they produce really awesome stuff. But this is a solution, but it's not an ultimate solution, right? You're just then substituting money for cheaper man hours and letting it run in parallel instead of coming up with something that just solves the whole problem for you or lets you get around it.
Right. And at the same time, you don't want to lose that, like basically handcrafting everything brings a better result because it is like specifically made for compared to like if you're procedurally generating things. So unless you're making a type of game that really built around that. So you don't want to lose that either, because then you're losing kind of like a lot of the soul of the game if you start just like repeating things too much, and just like you start seeing the patterns and so on.
When it comes down to it, I always get questions about AI, and so what I want to do is I'm going to start with Niklas and ask the AI question, and then Adam, I'll ask you a question about Surge in particular, and then Victor a little bit about Vermintide. But Niklas, the question has come up in Patron, as well as I think I sent you guys this. Is there an AI that you've seen in a game that's impressed you? That's not your own, sorry. Something that you've been like, wow.
So I saw this question, I was thinking about it, and the first thing that came to mind is definitely the Hitman games and their AI.
Oh, right.
Because they are running, because also I might be a bias because I'm also tackling a lot of similar problem with systemic emergent gameplay. And that is definitely one of the biggest challenges in general, is that like, we have this one behavior and it works really well in this context, but then in this other context, the behavior doesn't work, and how do we solve that and all that. And I'm constantly impressed by the Hitman guys and basically like how much emergent gameplay they provide to their players through the AI. So I really like that. And then there's also, there's also looking at like what the role of the AI is in the different games. So like, also what's called Last of Us is also really impressive from a completely different reason, in terms of like that there's like the believable character and the narrative and all of that. It really like you kind of like bond with this non-existing character on the screen and so on, and that's really impressive from that point of view. So it's really like it's so dependent on what game you're making and so on. But coming from my background with a lot of emerging gameplay, like Hitman is definitely one of the games that impresses me a lot.
Very cool. Adam, a question in particular about Surge.
Sure.
Is there anything that you, and we discussed this a little bit, but that was back prior to the release. So is there anything about the Surge that you wanted to get in that you couldn't? Like, and there's probably tons, I should say.
Yeah. I was going to say, the big thing for me, just for instance, I'm invading in Dark Souls like damn near every day. Like, I have like a lower level character murdering people, and I have a high level character I invade in Ring City with. And so for me, this is like a really addictive form of gameplay. Is I grew up playing fighting games since I was a kid, and so I have this sort of like that same kind of one-on-one, or I guess 1 versus 3, 1 versus 4 sometimes, but this competitive thrill that is something that I just absolutely love, and I wish that we were able to put those sorts of mechanics into the Surge, but it's just like it's an insanely heavy lift to build network capacity and good PvP, from scratch, basically. So we have only one network engineer, and we're doing experiments and stuff, and this is something I really, really want to add, in the future and in other stuff. But that's the biggest thing that I miss. It's like I wish that I could be playing the Surge and invade other players and kill them in the factories and stuff. But it's it's like it's just not in the game. It's a single player game, but it is so damn fun to have this. Talk about like procedural or emergent gameplay. It's like you're not running an AI, right? You're fighting somebody's brain, and I don't know. This is satisfying in a different sort of way. Like I love conquering the games, and the PvE challenges are great. But at the same time, you fight a player and it's different every time,
Yeah.
you know, and that's something I really want to include in the future.
Very cool. And then Victor, we talked about this a little bit prior to the podcast. This is sort of a question from me, which is just like, how in the hell you balance a game when you have 1 to 4 players, but also AI could possibly be in there against like 25. I can't remember how many Skaven can show up at any one time, like what the max is. How, other than carefully, how do you go about balancing that? Like, is it more computational, where you're like, hey, we look at how much damage is being done and we sort of don't spawn a Skaven? Or, I mean, what do you guys do?
No, the balance of the game is exactly the same. It doesn't take into account if it's an AI player or if it's a bot or a player playing. We just tried to make the bots as human-like as we could. I mean, there are definitely some complaints out there about our bots, and that's fine. We can take that. But the thing is, we sort of wanted them to behave like players just as much as we could, and like be as good as a average player would be. We had a problem like when we ran the beta that they were actually too good. They were sort of sniping all the special enemies as soon as they popped out, because they know everything. So it became really boring. You never like saw a gutter runner or a you could just like same second as like the characters called them out, they were like they're dead. So we actually had to make them a little bit more stupid, or not stupid, but at least have like some consideration time and stuff like that. So basically we just tried to make them as human-like as possible, and they're actually they are playing the game as a player. They are actually pushing buttons and doing stuff just like the player is doing. So they're when they attack, they press the mouse button. When they block, they press the mouse button. When they move forward, they press the keyboard button, like stuff like that. So they actually function exactly like players, sort of.
Very cool. I didn't know that. Is that normal, Victor? To mimic those?
I don't know, actually.
That's very interesting.
I think it's similar how Left 4 Dead did it, because Left 4 Dead, I think the enemies are even bots. I think they took like the Counter-Strike bots and made them, so they are sort of the AI. I don't know exactly. The one thing that is problematic is when we want to do stuff that is sort of a lot more co-op-y, like have problems and like encounters that requires 2 players. And we can never do that, and that's something that really it's really annoying, because like, it would be so cool to do a boss where you have to like go and do this, or an event where one player has to stay up there and the other one goes down there and pulls the lever, and like this happens and stuff like that, and we can never do that, because we have to, everything has to be doable on your own, like.
Right.
But at the same time, we don't balance the game for 1 player. We balance it for 1 player and 3 bots. But you have to be able to do everything yourself, because the AI can't like think for themselves, something like that. Yeah. So that's it. That's like the sad thing, I'd say. Otherwise,
what was that decision to basically use the gamepad as an input device for AI? Was that based on like that you wanted more like player-like behavior? Because I can imagine that like if you're adding a custom character controller, it's much smoother in how they move around and all of that.
I think it was just a matter of time.
Okay.
Gotcha.
I think it was just the easiest solution to get them working. I'm not 100% sure. I can't. You have to ask Robin who made it, but I think it was like, okay, this is a way that we can do it, and it will be done in time, and it will function, and they can do everything that the player can do without having to write this really complicated AI that takes care of all that stuff, and they can just like run around and function like a player. So I'm not sure if it was like the better way or if it was just the easier way. I'm not sure, actually.
Well, one of the things that just came, like for example, I just reviewed Origins, Assassin's Creed Origins, and the AI there, you have things you can do, but no one else in the world has to do them. And that it's infuriating for a player to see the enemy dodge 40 times, but you can only dodge 3 times before you're tired. And so to me, what you just said makes far more sense and makes me happy. Because, for example, when I'm playing a Street Fighter game, I know that the moment I press any button, the game already knows exactly what's going to happen, and it chooses to be dumber. Otherwise, it would just absolutely defeat me. So I like the idea of having it mimic those buttons, because it just seems to me like that's an easier way to at least get closer to what a human may do. And it's funny you mentioned that, you know, the AI when you started was really smart, because I don't know if you guys saw the little tweet from the Alien Isolation devs, but they were talking about their they were talking about their AI, and they were saying that they have two brains for their alien. They have one, which is the game. It knows where you are at all times. And then they have a second AI that is lying to the real AI all the time about where you are. Or it's not always telling you. It's giving it hints about where you might be. And that was the only way you could sort of mimic something where its senses aren't perfect, where its ability isn't perfect. I like the idea of doing the button presses. I think I'd like to see more do it. Because how many times have we played a game where you're like, God damn, this thing's fast. Like, it knows what I'm doing.
They are insanely fast, though. Yeah. But they can press buttons really, really fast.
Well, that's true. We had
a bug where when we introduced that the AI could, or like the bots could actually pick up grenades and stuff. So before they couldn't pick up grenades and they couldn't pick up potions, but then we added so they could pick them up and they could give them to the player. Because they can't really, we haven't figured out how to or we haven't put in the time actually to make them be able to use them in an intelligent way, so they can just carry them for the player. But the thing was that they're so fast, so when they were supposed to give the player they give a grenade to the player, and then a Skaven came, they started equipping the grenade, and then they hit, so they threw the grenade. So all of a sudden, our bots that could not throw grenades started throwing grenades. It was like, how is this happening? Why are they all of a sudden? How can they throw grenades? And it's like, because they're equipping the grenade to give it to me, and then they're so fast at pressing the button, so they're actually throwing it before they give it to me, and stuff.
That's a happy problem to have, though.
It depends.
That's true. That's true.
It's not happy if you're saving that nade, then you're fucking right.
And starting with Victor this time, when it comes to secrets in games, when it comes to secrets in development, any game that you've worked on, is there anything that, we talked a little bit about this before, but everybody's always interested. I think I gave you guys a little blurb about GTA's animals would call 911 over time to stop a player from going batshit insane, killing everybody just because no human was there. And then that was patched out as they improved the AI. Is there any little things that in Vermintide or in any of the games you've worked on where you're like, this is a cool little secret, or this is a cool thing we did? I remember one thing you did tell me about, which I thought was interesting, was when you started beta testing, you could hear players play. Isn't that what you had said? You could hear them talk? I thought you said that you were able to hear the voice chat.
Spy on the voice chat?
No, it wasn't spying on the voice chat. I don't remember. Maybe that wasn't you. I thought it was you.
No,
because that would be brilliant.
Recognize it, so.
Is there anything, though, with Vermintide or anything like that where you're like, this, this is sort of
I know there is stuff,
do?
But I can't really think of anything right now.
Okay, that's fine.
I forgot to. Come back to me and I'll think of something.
Sure. Adam, for the Surge, is there any game, Lords of the Fallen as well, is there anything that you're sort of particularly proud of as a secret or a thing you guys did that turned out well?
I mean, for me, this is also a tough one, I guess, because it's hard for me to separate some particular trick from just the way we try to solve all the shit that comes up every day. It's right. You're trying to come up with an extensible solution that other people can look at and understand. And I mean, hell.
Okay, well, how about this? Is there a particular solution?
It's really, really difficult, Claude. And it's like I saw that was a cool, Twitter explosion thing that was going down. Talking about their little hooks and tricks and stuff, but when I look at those things, it doesn't strike me as a trick. I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's a good solution. So it's it doesn't even stand out. That's just like a Wednesday. Is how do I make the thing do the thing? Well, this is how I make the thing do the thing. Now I'm done. I move on. So I don't know. They don't stand out enough in my memory, I guess. So sorry.
No, that's totally fine. What about you, Niklas? Anything that stands out, or are you just we rock, status quo? No, I'm just
No, but no, I think it's similar. That like, I mean, we are doing a version of these tricks. We're basically doing every single day. But I mean, in JC3, I don't know. It's not super fancy or anything, but we do want to encourage the player to be in the parachute. So. Hopefully not too visible, that we are like things like scaling the aim assist based on your different states. If you're in a parachute, you have a more generous aim assist and so on. Just because without it, like, and how much there is motion, and that the fact that you're further away, it just makes it less effective compared to being on the ground. So that's something that we did. But again, I don't see it as a secret or a trick necessarily. It's more like, that's how we solve the problem with the player not being effective enough in parachute. Like,
it's funny. This reminds me of something actually. That actually gives me something. So in the Surge we have a bunch of like humanoid enemies, right? And they are your size, and in many cases you and they share the same animation set. And so when we equip them with weapons, they're able to do the same thing that you're able to do. They're just run by AI. But the difference is that the hit zones for your attacks are marginally larger and longer than the hit zones for their attacks. So you have the same exact animation, the same timing, right? The same combos that they're able to do if their AI chooses to perform a whole combo or whatever. But the players' actual messages in the game, their actual, the hit areas are a little bit more forgiving. For me, my rationale, it might not be Torsten, our head of engineering's rationale, but my rationale is because of the camera angle is always kind of through you and over. So it's a lot harder for you to perceive distance and depth, right? Especially for like a fast move like slashes and pokes and stuff. And so it feels like you should be hitting if you have exactly perfect, like let's say your hit zone extends exactly to the last pixel of your weapon and no further, you feel like you're whiffing all kinds of shit that you should, that to your like, oh, I hit, what the hell, right? But you have to adjust for the feel in the end, and then the opposite is also true. So if the enemies have the exact same long hit zones, then you are really, really cognizant of this like sort of phantom range that they have, because suddenly it's not through your character at an angle, but rather coming straight at you, from the other direction. So you can perceive this distance so much better in reverse. So in a way, even though, Surge-like games or Surge-like Souls-like games, of which Surge is one, are really about like a tough but fair sort of combat systems, you still have to flex it for feel in the end to make sure it's a fun experience and not too frustrating.
Well,
this is
go ahead, Victor.
It's the same thing. Like it's, I don't even think of this as a trick, but we do the exact same thing. I mean, we because it's in first person, and so it's really hard to judge depth. Like, and it's melee combat. So our swords are like 1 meter wide and like 3 meters long, because and the way we figured it is like, if you think you hit, you hit. Like it's not about it. Oh, you exactly hit. It's like, if it feels like you hit, you hit. Like we shouldn't be. It's not about like millimeters of your sword, because you can't control how your sword goes anyway. So it's like, if it goes like this and it looked like you hit, okay, you hit him. It's fine. Like so our weapons are really, really like wide, and they're really a lot longer than they are supposed to be, with like the actual models for them and stuff like that. But
I think that's really funny. That's super funny to hear, I think, because like I think Vermintide felt awesome, and the feeling of like hammering, hammering. It feels really, really real, I guess. Like it doesn't feel like I have a lightsaber. It feels like I'm whacking them with the hammer, and that's really nice.
If we use the right width and stuff like that, you would feel like you're getting sheep, like we're cheating you all the time, because you wouldn't hit anything. Like it's.
Yeah, and that's about like, I mean, you're basically, as you're playing the game, you're role playing as the character that you're playing. So if in that case, you're playing as this like badass warrior or whatever it is, and that badass warrior should be able to judge the distance. But if the game, because of the perspective or whatever it may be, basically makes it harder for the player to actually step into that role, then we need to assist them by doing that. And I think that's fairly common practice in that sense.
It reminds me of a saying. We were talking. I think it was a Gears game, but it was like a 300-pound muscle-bound man is the world's worst window, and that's what a lot of times you're staring at is the back of some dude who's ripped with a gun, and it's very difficult to judge distance in a lot of those titles. And so, I would assume what you guys are saying is true, and that more people do a great deal of that. Just to make sure it feels right. It was funny with Vermintide because it was one of the things I liked right away was when I hit, it wasn't no dissing on Skyrim. It's obviously a good game and it's sold on 8,000 platforms, now coming out for the Apple IIe. But Skyrim is a lightsaber, as Adam said, and it can lose a little bit of that kinetic like feel to it, where a game like Vermintide or any game with a good whack, where it like you said, if you feel like you hit, you did. I like that. Like there's something about that really works for me. So
and then we like cheat with animations and like hit effects and all this kinds of stuff to make you feel like you actually connected, but you probably never did. But it looks like you connected, and if it looks like you connected, and then you feel like you connected. So everybody's happy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if you guys saw that tweet again. You all did about the tricks. They were even saying Gears of War in the multiplayer. They upped the damage if it was your first game because they were like, people don't want to play a multiplayer game if they die that very first. And I was I saw people say, you tricked us, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, if that is the worst of your day, go read the newspaper. I mean, Jesus Christ, calm down. Because
I mean, the only time that becomes a problem is like if it comes out and people start using it in some weird way, like they are starting over their accounts every day to get that first something, like these really weird things that people do when they find out weird tricks that they can do, and they start behaving in a really bad way. But otherwise, like that's going to happen one guy. It's going to be one time. It's going to be one guy playing one game, and he's going to feel like, okay, I killed some people, and he's going to be worse than everybody else, so it's going to be fine. There's not going to be a problem. So why not?
Yeah, I love those kind of things. We'll move on to, because I don't want to hold anybody super long, so we're going to move to patron questions. And with these are questions that the patrons have had. I've tried to sort of remove any, so there's no repeats or anything that is just sort of, it doesn't really fit our discussion. Ethan asks, I think, a really good question. It could be, skewed negative in today's environment, but I don't think we need to. He wants to know, are there any common assumption how many of these are there any common assumptions or public perceptions about game development that bother you or that you find particularly untrue? So I'll give you guys a second to think, and then the first person who wants to talk can go ahead and give
I think just one thing that pops up to mind, and I don't think that's necessarily the case for people that are actually like following the game industry, but definitely when I talk to people about what I do with other people, is that it is this perception of that game design is all about just coming up with ideas. And ideas are simple, and everybody has ideas. Like that is the hard part is to kind of like execute on those ideas and realize those ideas, or kill those ideas even though they in isolation might be really, really good, but it doesn't fit into the bigger puzzle, which is the game as a whole. So I think that at least some people seem to think that you're a game designer, so you're just sitting and like coming up with like these random ideas and
just using Siri to create your game. Just talk.
Make them, right? You know? So, it's funny. I love that answer. I was just talking with my team about it today. I have a rec open for like a narrative designer, right? And I was joking that like half of the applicants we get are people who don't have very much experience, and in their letter, their application, they're talking about, and I look forward to sharing with you all of the great ideas I have for making. you know, and believe me, I have so many great ideas. You guys are going to be happy to have me, you know, and there's no such thing as a job posting for idea guy at a game company. It's like, that's not a thing, right? So if you have ideas, great. Yeah, so does everybody. And the execution is where it counts, you know, and the consistency is where it counts. And just think stuff is what we do, that shit every day in the shower, you know, and I don't get paid for that. So, yeah, I think that's really, really true. The thing that bugs me sometimes, I don't know, hopefully this isn't too negative, but it's like we put a lot of ourselves into these products. You know, if we didn't really, really, really care, we wouldn't be working crazy long hours. We wouldn't be doing, you know, crunches and you know, getting paid less than if we were a financial analyst or an insurance software engineer or something. Instead, we're making entertainment stuff. And so it's hard not to pay attention to the criticism at all, because you have to pay attention to criticism in order to make your product better. You know, like there's constructive criticism, there's destructive criticism, but you have to read all of it in order to find the useful stuff. Yeah. But the thing that bugs me usually is when people are really, really critical about the what they see as choices that you've made to do one thing instead of another thing. You know, as if all of game development is like one giant bucket of game development time, and why'd you pour it here and not there? You know, why'd you make enemies instead of levels or something? You know,
right?
Like, what's wrong with you? Make more levels, you dummies. And it's like, yeah, you just dismiss those sort of comments, but still, it's like I want the people who are customers to be more aware of what we're doing to create these things, because in the end we want them to have fun. You know, it's not so much for like self-aggrandizement, it's not for glory, it's because we like really get a kick out of making shit that people enjoy for real, you know. And I want them to understand what goes into that, but you can't educate somebody who thinks that they already know everything about something that they don't know that much about, you know. So I find that frustrating. I don't really know how to address it in any way, you know. And then I don't want to stop reading the feedback, because you have to read the feedback, but it makes it tough sometimes. You know?
No, it is that kind of like, or at least we have a saying here that it's like, when we finish the game, at that point, that's when we know exactly how to make that game. But that's when we're already done, right? And that is it's super easy to look at. Believe me, all developers do like look at the finished game, and we know like, oh yeah, maybe we should have changed this, because that's really when you get the full picture of things. But compared to like when you're in pre-production and you're trying to come up with or like this make certain decisions, that is also long-term decision, because they require maybe a technical investment or anything like that. I mean, you're really like, you're making a educated guess, but it's still somewhat of a guesswork. And that's definitely like, I think it's easy to just look at the end result and like, oh yeah, but yeah, we can see that too. Like that's easy to see.
What about you, Victor?
We know all of the problems that are in the game.
Yeah,
definitely.
We're not telling you. You're saying I'm not telling you personally, Victor, when I review it.
But it's not that we're not aware that they're there. We just either couldn't fix them, didn't have time to fix them, or like we just
resources.
Of course, we wanted to fix them. Like it's not like we were like, oh, don't care about that. It doesn't matter. Like they're not gonna find out. Sort of like it's like, we're like, okay, So that's definitely one. And I really agree with the sort of negative feedback things. Like it can be really hurtful and really demoralizing to be reading like all the shit that people say about stuff that you put like 2 years of your life into. And like the one thing that I think is really weird is like people think that we are sort of malicious in some way and that we want to like fool them or do something bad, when all we want to do is make the best game that we can possibly make. Always, like, it's of course we want to make the best game. Like that's what we do. Like it's like, well, why wouldn't we want to make the best game? And like they think that we're sort of trying to fool them or trying to trick them or something like that. So, no.
Yeah.
And another thing that's funny is like how people like look at a screenshot and then they go like, oh, that's Unreal Engine. They changed the engine, or like, oh yeah, that's that one. Like, well, I can see that they've changed the UI, so it's Unreal Engine. It's like, what does the UI have to do with the Unreal Engine? Like,
Right.
so it's a guy here that paints the UI. He doesn't work for Unreal. Like, it's like that could have been any engine. Like, okay, there are like telltale signs that you can say, okay, that probably that engine or that engine. But like, yeah, that always makes me laugh when they like, oh, they must have changed the engine because look at the crosshair. It's completely different now. So they have changed. Yeah, like, no, that's not how it works.
No, but that's awesome. I've never heard that.
There's a lot of experts on the Steam forums that know everything. Like,
yes,
I mean, I actually
directors in waiting. These guys.
No, it was funny. I read this thing. It was a Steam forum thread. Someone had data mined JC3, and they have found like, oh, we have a file. It's called like the player XML. It contains a bunch of information about the player character, but like 90% of that file is actually redundant. It goes back to like, development of the engine. Sure. That information is actually somewhere else now. So, but in that file, it was called like the JC2 Reco was typed in as the character. So they were talking about, they're just reusing like the same thing, and it's like, no, it's a different, like this is a PS4 game versus PS3. Like, I mean, and like that information is not even used anywhere in the game. But of course, there were all these self-proclaimed experts there that it's like, I know exactly what happened, and they go and they have long, detailed explanations of what they think happened, which is completely wrong.
It's funny that you guys mentioned some of this stuff because multiple times, whether it be in a review or talking to other developers, I always have to remind a lot of people that most 99.9% of developers, nobody wakes up and says, God, I really want to make a shitty game today. Like, that's going to be so fun. I can't wait. And I think that unfortunately, for whatever reason, a lot of people feel like they don't, like there is some negative corporate concern that's running all of you guys. And and only independents are like Simba and the Lion King. You're like, oh, hold it up. And it's like, I'm sorry, I've seen some independents do some terrible shit. And I've seen AAA companies do fine and also terrible shit. That's because they're a company. They're trying to get from you money, and you're trying to get from them as much product as possible. There's that tit for tat. But when it comes to data mining and stuff, I think one of the biggest issues right now is that, and this is going to sound weird because it's me, but everybody has a voice and some people probably shouldn't. And what I mean by that is it's so easy to explain things that everybody's a conspiracy expert on everything. Yeah. And I've even had difficulty. I covered Walking the Walk I did for Mad Max. And I always put a disclaimer at the starting that it's like, this is how it's not a technical analysis because I don't know what they did. I'm just saying this is how I feel when I walk the game. And one of the reasons why is because I saw somebody doing a technical analysis of a game and I'm like, half your shit's wrong. Like, but they're able to do it. And then another person watches it and goes, oh, well, that's right. And then if that person says something about a developer, then people are more apt to believe them. And I think that the more stuff you guys do like this, Game Sutra, obviously a great website for people to go and gather data from about game development. I think information's the best killer for that. But you know what? It's life. It's social media. That shit'll happen. All I'll tell you guys is most smart people know you don't wake up and say, let's make a shitty game. The next question is for Victor. It's from Todd Tanner. He says, now this is, of course, only if Victor could answer this. Does Fatshark have any plans for future projects in the War of the XXX series now that Roses and Vikings are offline? If so, what era of history would you like to use for the setting, and what gameplay design choices would you like to do moving forward?
The answer to that is pretty boring because we don't own the IP, so we can't do it unless Paradox asks us to do it.
Gotcha.
So we just developed that game or those two games. We never owned those two games. It was a Paradox IP from the start. So I mean, we're probably not going to do it because it doesn't feel like Paradox is too interested in doing more of them since they shut them down, both of them. But I mean, there's a lot of DNA from those games that are in Vermintide. I mean, and like then this is like also a thing that people like get wrong. It's like, oh, they just reused that other game and just made it again. No, that's not it. That's like, but a lot of ideas came from how do you do like a good melee combat system came from doing War of the Roses and then War of the Vikings. I personally never worked on any of those games. I was doing other stuff. But I think a lot of people in our office would probably really like it because we did those games because a lot of the guys at our office really liked those types of games and were like big fans of Mount and Blade and stuff like that. So good era. I don't know. Pirates. I don't know. Ninjas. I don't know.
Pirates versus ninjas. Yeah. I think we have ourselves a winner.
I generally like doing more fantastical stuff because it allows for a lot more freedom in design. I think you can do a lot more fun stuff. I think there's a place for simulation stuff as well. Like that's really cool. But for me personally, I think I'm having a lot more fun doing Vermintide because we can do a lot more weird stuff and be more creative with what we're doing.
It's funny. There's a lot of little. I don't know any other way to describe it, but closet fans of that series, and I have a ton of questions in particular about that series, which I am being brutally honest. I'm gonna have to go look it up because I didn't even.
Yeah, but I think it's a game that it was super hardcore, so it had a lot of really, really hardcore players that stayed with it for an insanely long time, and they played. I don't know. They played for like thousands of hours, so I can understand that there's a lot of people out there that are like wondering what's going on and are we going to do more and like really want to see more. But the thing is that we never owned it, so I don't know.
No, I mean that happens. I don't think a lot of gamers know that just because you developed it, they have to look at the publisher too, and then they have to track that IP down and go, oh, this and this person owns it. So looks like, let's see. Okay, question for all three. Since we recently heard from EA during the Visceral shutdown that their Star Wars game will be redesigned to follow current market trends, how do you see this from a game design perspective? Each of your companies designs games that never seem to really be bothered by those current trends, like massive amounts of microtransactions or multiplayer, I think, now that I think about it.
Sort of.
Vermintide, of course. I played most of that by myself. Do you make a conscious effort to stay away? Now, I know you guys don't personally run everything, but what do you see about that decision? I know a lot of people were really worried about it, and then a lot of developers, even an ex-Visceral developer, was like, single-player games aren't dying. We'll start with Adam because I haven't really got to discuss too much about the Surge today.
Yeah,
when you guys saw something like that, were you guys like, great, leaves more space for us to release a single player game? Or I mean, do you feel the same way? Like it's single player?
I don't agree with their their public reasoning. What I suspect is that the development was probably quite troubled anyhow. And that they needed to talk about, a repositioning or a restart or whatever in more sort of like positive terms and not just say like, yeah, it was not working out. So, right. I don't think that's probably what they want to say. And I don't know anybody over there. So please don't take that as like, secret infos or rumor mongering or anything. I think that depending on the size of your company, that you'll be more influenced or less influenced by market trends, so if you're an enormous conglomerate with like, billions of dollars every year in headcount funds or headcount costs rather, then it probably behooves you from like a shareholder perspective to try to maximize the return on what you're spending, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's the best thing for the end users or the developers for that matter, I don't know. I'm the type of person who is frequently inspired by games that I play, and it makes me want to incorporate elements of things that I've played or put my twist on them or say, oh man, I would love to work on a game like that. That was so fun. These are sort of like my internal motivations, but nobody wants to just, try to react to whatever the last successful thing was and then just do their version of it, right? You're trying to like we were talking before, you're putting so much of yourself into this stuff. You're putting years of time and stress, into these projects. And
right.
If you're not doing it because you have a personal attachment to it or a creative attachment to it, then to me, you're going about it, really backwards. So, maybe from a fiduciary standpoint, there's arguments in the opposite direction, but that's never been a strong motivator for me. And I've never joined a team where that's a strong motivation. And the few, for instance, this is a hot topic now, like people talking about the loot chests and the, free-to-play systems in purchased titles and this kind of stuff. I can really see these complaints. I think it is a little questionable to put all this monetization stuff in games that have a box price as opposed to games that are directly a direct free-to-play proposition where that they have a business model, and their business model is you come into the casino for free and you spend money here, like most people do anyway. But I don't know. I mean, I'm conflicted on those sorts of trends, but I can understand that like games still cost $60, right? $60 is not what $60 was 10 years ago, and games cost $60. And then 10 years before that, they cost $60. So if costs have gone up like this and the price has stayed completely static, and in fact, in real world value has gone down because of inflation, then like how exactly are you supposed to make ends meet? If like you have to somehow fund all this stuff. So I don't know. You can tell I'm a bit kind of on both sides. Like I can understand the reality, but it's not the kind of thing that I like to do. I don't like working on free-to-play systems very much. I've worked on some and I didn't find it very fun or satisfying. I much prefer the core gameplay and creative aspects. So
yeah. What about you, Niklas? You're working on, let's see. So Just Cause. Do any of yours have multiplayer? I know they made a mod, right? For
that's a community made
community
mod.
Yeah. When you see like a giant game like this, and I think there were rumors, of course, that there were actually some issues in the development of that game. But when you see a huge team like that, Amy Henning was in it, and I can't remember, Jade Raymond. There were a bunch of people who were heads of it, and that just sort of comes apart. Do you guys look at that and go, that's something we even need to worry about? Or is Avalanche one of those companies that's like, we do our thing, and we just, do you have to look at do you have to look at loot boxes? Do you have to look at those kind of things at all?
Fortunately, I haven't had to look at that. And I definitely think that, we, as a studio, we definitely, and this is a little bit above my pay grade in terms of absolutely. Like making these decisions, but I definitely feel like the general attitude we have is that we are going our own way. We are carving out our own kind of path in that sense, and I definitely think also that there's a big difference in perspectives when we talk about like executives at EA versus our perspectives on games. It's like very different because. And no offense to the executives on the EA, but they're looking at the numbers. They're looking at like what is selling and what not. And also, I think that in general, like their view on what a hit game is very different from what I think the public think a hit game is. Yeah. Like I know, I'm not gonna mention any name, but or anything like that. But I know some publishers that basically did not think that Uncharted that is not a hit game for them because it's not selling the amount of units that basically Call of Duty or Battlefield is doing. Right. That is basically like so of course with that difference in perspective, I think that I try to stay away from all of this as much as possible because I do want to focus on just making the best possible game that I can do, and then within the framework that is given to me in that sense.
When I wanted to ask Victor something real quick. Did you guys announce? Am I going crazy, or did you guys announce that Vermintide 2 won't have loot chests? Was there a PR announcement? Okay.
Yeah,
so
but it was like it ended up like it was this major PR thing, but it was just like it was a question that we got during our reveal stream, and we didn't have time to answer it, or we just lost it in the mix of questions. Mm-hmm. And so our community guy was just like, "Can I answer this question?" He's like, "Yeah, sure. We're not going to do it." And then he's like, "Yeah, we're not going to do it." And then it became like our major sort of PR strategy. But it was just like, yeah, no, it's like, it wasn't a big deal. But then it became sort of a headline type of thing.
It's nice when your PR strategy going forward matches with what everybody seems to have wanted already.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, great. that was
but
was
at the same time, I think we're a small company. We need to make money. I mean, we are self-funding the game, so it's really important for us to. I mean, Vermintide. What we made from Vermintide, it has gone like almost 100% into making Vermintide 2.
Right.
So, like, if we don't make enough money, I don't know what we're gonna do. Like, so we need to figure out ways to make money. Well, we want to do it as in a nice way as possible. We think like loot crates is kind of a stupid system, and we don't really like it. It's like, well, we do like DLC and stuff like that that we feel is like this is actual value. We stuff like that. But I mean, I really do understand how EA thinks that, because they just look at the numbers and it's like, okay, this is gonna cost this much to finish. It's going to sell this much. It's not going to make the money back. So it's not worth finishing it probably. It's not. So I do understand where they're coming from, but I think it just opens up for smaller companies to take over that spot and just do it themselves. It's like because for us it would make a lot of sense to fill that spot. Like if we sold 4 million copies of Vermintide 2, we'd be like the happiest company in the world.
Yeah.
But
how big are
that
you
Star
guys?
Wars game sold, we're 65 now.
Okay, that's almost exactly the same as us. I think we're 70.
Yeah.
And there's so few of these like mid-sized studios that are still making like the middle has just fallen out. Right. You're a tiny little indie shop, right? Or your Ubisoft, EA type, multi-studio, hundreds and hundreds of people thing. So people, I think, lose sight of the products that are not the products, but the reality of like our size companies making products. For like, I'm sure for us, a hit game, is numbers of copies that would make an EA exec like fucking shit their pants, right? They would be like, oh God, what have we done? But we're like, sweet, we're fully funded now for our next project. Everything worked out for the best, and it's just a completely different set of goals,
Yeah. So like when we sold like 300,000 units, we'd like, yay!
Yeah.
we could do another one. Like whoa, like
yeah.
And like for EA, that would be like, okay, like shut down the studio. It's over, man. They have to sell like 8 million copies. Or if they don't sell 8 million copies, it's like it's not worth it. So I do understand where they're coming from.
I do too. It killed my soul a little bit to read that Resident Evil 7 at 4 million was not considered by Capcom as doing as well as they wanted. And I was like, okay, it's a PSVR/horror title, and any other horror game that sold this many, people would just explode and they'd be like, this is the greatest thing ever. And it was a very good game. And that was a while ago when they were talking about that it wasn't meeting numbers. There were another company that was, and I remember a lot of people going like, wait, if that's not meeting numbers, like how many needs to be sold, and who do you sell to? Because the one other thing that's going on is there are I call them B companies, and I apologize because I might be speaking towards like maybe Victor or Adam's size company, but I call them, it's the only way I can think of really describing them. It's that middle tier. But whenever I say middle, it feels like I'm saying not as good, and that's not necessarily true. So
it's about scale.
Yeah, and for example, Piranha Bytes just released Elix, and it's got a ton of issues. But I'm going to tell you right now, like 80, 90, 100 hours in, and I'm still doing shit and finding stuff. So it's not like single player games are dying; they're just being made by different people. They're just being shuttled off onto this different group. Were you going to say something?
Piranha Bytes, I mean, these dudes have been doing these types of games forever, right? Like Risen and Gothic and all this stuff. And this is their area. I was actually up at their summer party. They're up in Essen. I'm in Frankfurt. They're in Essen, and our two studios are friendly with each other. We visit each other all the time. And this is when they were gearing up for Elix, and they were saying some of the same stuff. It's like, it's not about competing with Uncharted. It's about having their core customer base and serving exactly what their people are looking for, and they do it really well. They give their particular diehard customers, and hopefully some more, the exact type of game that they're looking for. They do it as pretty cheaply with not as many people as you would expect. Their studio is like this giant house with a backyard that they've converted into a development space. It felt like a college party, like going into somebody's giant backyard house party, people grilling and getting drunk, and it's just a different thing. This is not anything like, an EA or a Ubisoft or whatever development culture or timeline or scope or budget, but they can still be successful in their bounds of success. They define success as serving their base, making enough money to build the next game, and hopefully some on top of that. And if they achieve that, then to them this is a hit for them. And it doesn't matter how it stacks up against one of the juggernauts, I guess.
Yeah. Niklas, were you going to add something?
I forgot what it was.
I apologize for that.
No worries.
So when it comes to games and it comes to development, I'm asked this, and they want it. Todd wants me to ask you guys. So we'll start with Niklas. The happiest memory you have in gaming. It can be playing a game, it can be developing a game, but he's like, what is one of the happiest moments? Like a moment they were like, yes. Was it defeating a game? Was it shipping a game? Was it somebody else's game?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of like small, like basically when you work on a feature and it's like you did the paper design and then you prototyped it, and then like basically seeing a feature coming together, and when you're sitting and like, it works, and it works exactly as I wanted it to be. Then that is definitely like a big rush of just like, yes, and it's also because then you feel like, now I can safely put that aside and like focus on some other things and so on. That like game development, I feel like it's filled with those like small moments like that, and like playing games. Now, whenever I think like, and it's not tied to a particular moment, but it's just that like, one of my fondest memories of games in general, when I think about like, happiness and games, what is basically when I was about 12 years old playing like A Link to the Past, Zelda. Like that is definitely like one of the experience that has stuck with me, and that is basically like, I consider it's the best game I've ever played, and that constantly comes up. Like that's I think finishing, or not necessarily even finishing a feature, but just seeing something come together, and especially because like a lot of times when we're working, it's like you have all these like small kind of like islands of features and gameplay, and basically seeing them like, once you actually see like all the things start clicking, and it's like, it actually starts coming together. That's a great feeling. Cool. Kind of confirmation that like some of the kind of like guesswork or educated guesswork that you did in the past was actually correct. Like seeing that paying off.
Very cool. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, those really are the happy moments in development. Like I think of development work as you're always, especially like mentioned earlier, the pre-production phase. You're doing so many hypotheses. You're making educated guesses, but you don't really know. You think, I think this is the best decision. I think this is going to turn out to be the most fun. But, you can only prototype certain things. You can't prototype 100%. So you have to place some bets where you just think this is a good bet, but you don't know for certain. And when you're getting closer to the end of the project and you see, like you just said, when you see these bets coming up positive, like, thank God this works together with this other thing. Okay, that could have been bad. It's like this kind of stuff is like, for me, it's the relief. It's like you don't really know if you made the smart decision for a really long time, and then when you find out that you did, it's like the best feeling ever. And playing games, like I said, I come from an MMO background. I played MMOs like a maniac when I was a teenager. I almost got kicked out of high school, because of this stuff. And it's like, I still think that some of the biggest like emotional highs of my life are like, high intensity PvP situations, or like winning a raid fight in EverQuest. Nothing was instanced, at least, like in the earlier days, nothing was instanced. And so everything was a competition. If some raid boss came up, you were trying to assemble your guild and kill the thing before some other guild could assemble and kill the thing. And there's that sense of winning with your team against another team that is, I can remember now being like 15, 16, and doing this stuff, like waking up in the middle of the night to race for a dragon, even though I knew I was going to be dead in class the next day, but totally worth it, right? And that sense of like overwhelming victory that you just like defeated not just the PvE enemy, but you defeated another group of players like right in their face, is just like intensely satisfying. And I still think we feel some of that today, like when you're hoping to win, you're hoping to make a good game and do a good job, and you get that same sort of like, yes, right, this kind of feeling is something that I think many people never really feel. They might feel happy or satisfied, but they might not feel that like elation, that win, that real competitive win. And so this is the kind of thing I'm always looking for when I'm playing games now, is the opportunity to have the struggle and the overcoming of a struggle, and to give me that rush,
Very cool. What about you, Victor?
I think like professionally, I totally agree with like in the phase that we're in right now, like an alpha phase or something like that, when everything comes together. It's a lot of hard work, but it's also so awesome to finally stuff happens, because often like before that time, there's been a long period of like nothing really happening. It feels like nothing's moving forward, when we're not going anywhere, and then all of a sudden everybody starts checking in their stuff, and everything's like boom, 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 and stuff starts to work, and it's like finally like that's really awesome. Another is, after we released Vermintide, we got a 90% from PC Gamer, and PC Gamer is like the Maggie bucketing. So it was like always on my bedside table, like always.
That's awesome.
So that was just completely insane to be. And I remember like when you were like small and you were looking at those reviews and like, okay, anything below 90 isn't really worth playing. And like, so finally I was like, yes, we got the 90, we're worth playing. That was super awesome and such a sort of like life goal thing. And from like a gaming perspective, I agree with Niklas. Like Zelda is the best game ever made, like in general. But I also agree with Adam. Like I was playing the beta of World of Warcraft, and I was playing a shaman, and I resurrect this guy called Linog, and we started playing, and then we played for like 9 years together. And it turned out he was like a Danish guy. Like I didn't know his name for like the 4 years. I only knew this guy I played with, and we played for 9 years or something. It's so weird sort of friendship that we only had in World of Warcraft. We like never talked outside of the game, but we played like every day for 4 or 5 years. I don't know. It's like, and it's such a weird sort of. And that's what I tried to explain to a lot of like people that don't understand games and think that it's the addiction is like the game. A lot of them don't understand that it's the social aspect that's the addiction. Right. Especially with like MMOs, it's like I can't just leave my friends. Like these guys are my friends. I hang out with them every day. I can't just like go bye. So that was really cool. It's like it wasn't like that moment, but that moment turned into like a 8-year or 10-year like friendship, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and even I think you're absolutely right. Like socially, people think a single player can't be social, but that's what discussion forums or even Twitter or whatever are about. And I've had some of the best, most awe-inspiring discussions where somebody just randomly said something about a game that I played, and I'm like, wait, what? And all of a sudden, you're on some kind of weird trip where you're like, you might be right, and you start looking at all these different things, you start thinking about it, and you're like, and you can talk for weeks, for months about a game, and I think that we see that with other art forms, obviously movies and music, but there's something about games. I think it's obviously the interactivity that, because Victor could play a game.
Because it's everybody has their own story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, it's the co-authorship, like between the game and the player.
Word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. One last question before I let you gentlemen go. This is a question I know I've asked Adam and I've asked Victor, but no one will remember your answer, so you can give the same one. I always ask people one really big personal outside of games hobby that they have. And one of the reasons why is obviously humanize people a little bit. Like we said, no game dev says I want to make a shitty game, but they're also people too. They have outside things that they like to do that aren't about games. So we'll let Niklas go first since he's never answered.
Yeah.
What's an outside interest you have?
I think like cooking for me is actually very like
Victor, he stole your answer.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
It is that kind of like I get to focus on it, but it doesn't require too much brain power, but it's still like, so I can kind of like clear my head and just do. It's kind of like meditation in a way. I'm like, oh, I'm focused on this thing, and like I like cooking. Like it's nice. My wife likes that I like cooking as well.
Oh, so you're not only like cooking, you're somewhat good at it. Other people can eat it, unlike mine. I gotcha.
I'm getting there.
What's your favorite thing to cook? Is there a favorite meal?
I made a chanterelle risotto last week that turned out pretty good, and there's a risotto. I really like risotto.
Very cool. What about you, Adam? Outside interest?
I'm also into food, but on the other side of things, I eat the foods that are delicious and
that's awesome.
Exclusive. Yeah. I mean, this is something that my wife and I really have loved to do. And in some cases, we lived in San Francisco, which is just like a mecca of all sorts of different culinary experiences, and stuff. And so, I see it sort of like I really appreciate when I go to like a fine dining restaurant, or even, just like a place around the corner here in Frankfurt. There's a specialty called Grüne Soße. It's green sauce, right? And it's like some sour cream and a whole bunch of like a specific set of like 7 herbs. It's just like blitzed together. But it's freaking delicious. It's super good on schnitzel and with sausages, and they put potatoes and eggs in it and stuff. But it's like, for me, this like seeking out new experiences and learning about cultures and backgrounds is one half of it, and really, really cool. But for me, the other half is I see it like game development stuff, only like real. It's like these guys bust their fucking asses to put together one plate of food. They use all their expertise that they've learned. They're executing over and over and over again, right? Like executing on the theory. It's not about the idea. It's about how they make it. And it's essentially in the end for enjoyment and consumption, so it's not different, I think, really from what we do. And so I have a real appreciation for, the chefs and cooks and whoever who are making these things, because it's like they're making it hopefully for their own satisfaction, but they're also making it so that everybody else eats it and enjoys it. And it's just this kind of, for me, it's a really positive sort of vibe to appreciate this sort of skill from other people. Like we used to save up money and go to the fancy pants places that cost $1 gajillion and stuff, but not as much now. But I don't know. It's a fun thing. I still have sort of like a hit list in my mind of all the different places that we went when we lived in the Bay, and even now we're kind of running down a list here in Frankfurt in Germany.
Very cool. What about you, Victor? Obviously.
Oh yeah, cooking. I love cooking as well. It's exactly like Niklas says. It's like meditation for me. Mm-hmm. Like if I have a really stressful day, I can come home and be like really like stressed and like not had a good day, and then I cook and I forget all about it. So it's a really good way to sort of cool down and like focus on something else. And I love going like super nerdy and buying all kinds of stuff, like really digging into different styles of cooking. I had a big sort of Mexican period, and now I'm all into like smoking and grilling stuff, and like I that's what I do, or like it occupies all of my spare. Non thinking about games times is like thinking about what should I eat and how should I cook it, and like me and my brother. We're exactly the same, and like when we spend like the summers together, the only thing we talk about is like, okay, what should we eat tonight? like first thing we say, like, okay, how are we gonna do it? And like that.
And so, Adam's thinking, what can I eat tonight? So you guys are a good group.
Yeah.
So Victor, when you're, I mean, I guess I do martial arts, so I would assume that's probably it for me. But when you're putting things together and stuff, and you're cooking, do you think it's just because it's just enough brain power to stop you from being able to think about the game stuff? Or is it also like what Adam said, where it's like putting things together and it feels like you're making in a weird way, you're doing something somewhat like game design. I mean, what drew you to cooking?
I don't know. I just grew up cooking with my mother, basically. I always loved helping her cooking. I always loved going to the store and buying food with her. And then when I sort of moved out, I just really wanted to eat real stuff. Like I always hated like microwave food and stuff like that. I just don't enjoy it. So I just started cooking. So everybody I live with, I just like, okay, I'm the cook. I'll cook everything. You do the dishes, so I'll cook. So
that's awesome.
And then I just started like doing recipes. And after a while, you've done a recipe for a couple of times, you can start improvising, and then you start understanding how it goes together. And now I'm like, nowadays I'm really nerding down and like watching a lot of like YouTube channels and stuff like that for like really figuring out exactly how it works and stuff like that. So yeah.
I mean, there's so much science going into it in terms of like different temperatures or like and how you mix the flavors together, and like finding some weird exotic ingredients and trying to like, oh, maybe try grilling this. Just experimenting is a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I don't get that much time doing that because a lot of times I also have to eat. So if I fail an experiment, it's not that great. Then it's takeout.
Yeah, that there's nothing that sort of can sort of get me down as much as cooking something and failing. It ruins my week.
Just that's awesome. You heard it here, folks. The best designers of some of the best games, they all have cooking in common, or eating. Maybe that's a trait. Everybody who comes on
of the equation, right?
Exactly. I should start asking everybody. Maybe this is the one trait all of them possess, and that's what makes good game designers. It's interesting though to hear that, because you guys aren't the only ones. Some of the composers I talk to, and it's like the moment I ask, they're like, "Oh, cooking." Me, it's like if it was ever alive, and then if you burn it, I'll eat it. And I don't know how to cook at all. I do if there's a microwave direction. But it's funny because if I went to Victor's house, Victor'd be like, "We got a couple hours," and I'd be all, "No, mine's 7 minutes in the microwave." Go ahead.
Yeah, I cook like for at least an hour a day.
Damn, that's cool. That's I think really that's cool. A good way to de-stress. Is doing something. You know, I know a lot of people who have long commutes, and strangely enough, they like it because that drive, and I used to have one, and it's weird to be working at my home, and you're like, I can't go anywhere. Where do I'm stuck. And so anything that can sort of break you out of that mold is very good. I want to say thank you very much for you guys coming on. It's been an absolute blast. I definitely want to say thanks to the patrons who have given us good questions and some interesting discussion topics. I hope to have you guys on again at some point in the future. I wish you all luck, especially Adam's got his coming, Vermintide, and 2, and then also Niklas, but he can't talk about his game.
Right? No, not yet.
We'll call it Mad Max 2 Beyond Karak Dome. If you guys ever decide to do a Mad Max 2, I need to know. Man, I liked that game. Anyway, peace out, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Bye. Thank you. It was fun. Bye.